There's a specific kind of loneliness that only famous people experience. It isn't the loneliness of an empty apartment or a quiet night alone. It's standing on a stage in front of 50,000 screaming fans and realizing that not one of them actually knows you. It's seeing your face taped to bedroom walls across the planet while your own bedroom starts to feel like a cage. It's being simultaneously the most recognized human being alive and the least understood. Justin Drew Bieber has lived inside that contradiction for more than 15 years. Fame found him before he found himself. The industry picked him up while he was still basically a child, and what it eventually handed back to the world was a young man who had been through the ringer, rebuilt by faith, and somehow, against a lot of odds, still standing. This isn't a highlight reel of scandals. It isn't a worst moments compilation. This is something more human than that. The story of what happens when the entire world's attention lands on a kid before he's ready for it, and what it takes to survive that. It's a story about a mother who was practically a teenager herself, a father who missed everything early on and then tried to make up for it later, a manager who staked his whole career on a YouTube video, a girlfriend who became a cultural symbol, a wife who eventually became his anchor, and through all of it, one boy from a small town in Ontario who could sing like he was born knowing how, with absolutely no idea what that gift was about to cost him. He was arrested in front of the cameras. He was dragged through headline after headline about a wild night in Miami. And in his own words, years later, he admitted how brutal it was to be that young, inside that machine, surrounded by people telling him they loved him one minute and abandoning him the next. Picture a small town of about 30,000 people, famous mostly for its theater festival, its swans, and its brutal winters. Nobody expects a global superstar to come out of a place like that. But one did. Justin was born March 1st, 1994, to two 18-year-olds who were barely out of high school themselves. His mother, Patricia "Patty" Millett, ended up raising him essentially alone. His father, Jeremy, wasn't really in the picture in those early years. For roughly a decade, Patty moved from apartment to apartment, bounced between relatives' spare rooms, and stretched every dollar to cover rent and groceries while her son did homework wherever there happened to be a flat surface. What she didn't have in money, she made up for in conviction. She filled their tiny apartment with worship music, brought Justin to church, and prayed like her life depended on it, because in a lot of ways, it did. Justin has said many times since that her faith was the one steady thing in an otherwise unstable childhood. Jeremy drifted in and out during those years, wrestling with a rocky past of his own and struggling to settle down. He wasn't a villain, just a young father who loved his son but didn't yet know how to show up for him. Justin would spend much of his adult life untangling his feelings about that. But what really shaped him as a kid was music. He was startlingly gifted, the kind of kid who could pick up an instrument and just play it. Drums, piano, guitar, trumpet, he absorbed all of it by ear. His mom got him a drum kit at age 4, and within weeks he was out playing kids twice his age. He sang constantly, everywhere, without a shred of self-consciousness. When he turned 12, Patty started filming him and uploading the videos to YouTube, not as a career move, just to let faraway relatives see him sing. She had zero industry connections and zero master plan. Just a camera, a kid with an insane voice, and a platform that nobody yet understood the power of. He covered R&B and pop hits with a kind of raw conviction that felt way beyond his age, like every lyric meant something to him personally. The view counts started climbing. Then they exploded. Back home, though, he was still just the kid who could really sing. Popular, athletic, easygoing, the type of kid everyone liked without quite being able to say why. He played hockey because, well, he was Canadian. He went to school, had friends, lived an ordinary life, except for the extraordinary thing happening every time he opened his mouth to sing. He had no idea a stranger halfway across the continent was about to change everything. In 2008, a 27-year-old talent manager stumbled across one of those videos, a 13-year-old from a small Ontario town, belting out a cover in a local talent show. Something about the way this kid sang, full-bodied, completely unguarded, stopped him cold. That manager, Scooter Braun, didn't just watch the clip once. He binged the entire channel. By the end of the night, he'd made up his mind. He had to track this kid down. That wasn't simple in 2008. YouTube barely had a way to message people. Braun's team had to trace clues buried in the videos back to a school in Stratford, then hunt down a phone number for Justin's mother. When Patty picked up, she was, understandably, skeptical. A stranger in Atlanta calling himself a music manager, asking to fly her son across the border? That's not a call most parents jump at. She did what any careful parent would. She asked around, dug for information, took her time. Eventually, she decided to trust him. That decision would prove both life-changing and, at times, brutally hard. So they flew to Atlanta. Justin sang, and the person who happened to be listening was Usher, one of the biggest names in music. Usher caught Justin performing in a parking lot outside Braun's office and did something most stars in his position wouldn't bother doing. He actually stopped and paid attention. What he heard was enough to make him immediately call music executive L.A. Reid and, according to the now famous story, essentially say he just found something special. Justin Timberlake reportedly wanted him too, hoping to sign him to his own label. Depending on who's telling the story, the reasons Justin ultimately went with Usher's camp shift a little, but everyone agrees on the outcome. By the end of 2008, 14-year-old Justin had a record deal, a manager, and a trajectory that was about to rewrite pop music. Patty uprooted her entire life to go with him. First Atlanta, then wherever the industry needed them next. She left her home, her friends, her whole support system in Ontario, stepping into a business she knew nothing about, purely because she believed in her son and couldn't imagine letting him go through it alone. What barely got mentioned at the time, because everyone was too busy celebrating the success story, was what Justin actually gave up. He didn't just leave a town, he left his childhood. No more hallways, no cafeteria, no school dances, none of the small, mundane experiences that quietly teach a person who they are. He switched to homeschooling and, in the process, traded an education in being a normal teenager for an education in being a brand. How to smile on command, how to give a good handshake, how to stay warm but guarded with strangers. He mastered all of that. What nobody had time to teach him was how to mess up quietly and learn from it. The ordinary, private failures that most people get to have without an audience. By 2010, he wasn't just famous, he was a phenomenon. Bieber fever got written up like an actual epidemic. His debut EP, My World, dropped in November 2009 and made him the first solo artist ever to land 4 songs from a debut project on the charts before the album even fully released. Its follow-up debuted at number 1. He was 16. At the height of it, he was reportedly gaining around 1 million new Twitter followers a week and briefly held the record for most followed person on the platform. Fans would scream themselves into hysterics, alarming enough that his mother hired security typically reserved for heads of state. And underneath all of that noise was just a teenage boy, dealing with acne, a cracking voice, all the standard indignities of puberty, except with cameras trained on him the entire time. He was expected to be charming, humble, and camera-ready at every turn, performing adult emotions in songs written for him about experiences he hadn't even lived yet. Being told constantly that you're one in a billion, that ordinary rules don't apply to you, while everyone around you is financially dependent on keeping you happy, that combination makes it nearly impossible to grow up in any normal sense. Real growth requires mistakes, and mistakes require people around you who aren't being paid to smile through them. His inner circle was small and strangely structured. Scooter Braun functioned as manager and something like a father figure, a blurry, complicated dual role. His mom was constant and loving, but was also a young single parent inside an industry that mostly treated her as an inconvenience. Everyone else orbiting him, so-called friends, often had more interest in his fame than in him, and telling the difference is genuinely hard even for adults, let alone a teenager. Then there was Selena Gomez. They crossed paths the way young celebrities often do in a famously small industry, both dealing with the exact same pressures, both being consumed by the same machine, which gave them an understanding of each other that almost no one else could offer. Their relationship started under wraps and eventually became one of the most publicly dissected romances in pop culture, spanning nearly a decade of breakups and reconciliations. Justin has since admitted he simply didn't know how to love someone properly back then. He was too unresolved internally, and that mess bled into the relationship in ways he couldn't fully explain at the time. Selena, for her part, has spoken candidly about the toll it took on her. Neither of them was the villain. They were both catapulted into fame before they'd had the chance to figure out who they were. None of that was visible to the public at the time, though. All anyone saw was the smile, the hair flip, and hit after hit, each one generating more revenue and quietly draining more out of him. The blockbuster concert documentary that came out during this era painted a picture of a preternaturally calm, grateful, humble young star. In hindsight, a lot of that was carefully constructed. The unraveling didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. By 2013, he was 19, sitting on more wealth than most people see in a lifetime. With access to virtually anything he wanted, a private jet, round-the-clock security, a sprawling estate, and an endless supply of people whose job was to agree with him. He also, by multiple accounts, had developed some troubling private habits, a fraying temper, and a growing sense that consequences simply didn't apply to him. That mindset would soon spill out very publicly. It happened fast, and it happened loudly. In January 2014, he was pulled over in Miami Beach for reckless driving and resisting officers. He was 19. The mugshot from that night, chin tilted up, half smirking, the look of someone who'd been told, "You can do no wrong," so many times he'd started to believe it, went viral instantly and stuck around permanently, becoming shorthand for a golden boy spiraling. Around the same period, an old video surfaced of him using a deeply offensive slur. He'd been 15 at the time of filming, though that context didn't do much to soften public reaction. His apology got picked apart, so he apologized again, and the whole cycle played out messily online with every opinion amplified. There was also the infamous egg-throwing incident, where he was accused of vandalizing a neighbor's house to the tune of thousands of dollars in damage. Police searched his home looking for evidence related to that case and found illegal items belonging to a friend, not Justin himself, but the optics were still terrible. He was subjected to intense screening at airports coming out of Japan and during a stop in Australia. He lost sponsorships and became the subject of a White House petition signed by more than 100,000 people, demanding he be deported. In retrospect, that petition captured just how quickly public affection can curdle into public contempt. The same machine that built him up tore him down at the exact same speed. What almost none of the coverage acknowledged was that a person was clearly struggling. This was someone yanked out of everything familiar at an age when most people are still figuring out who they are, told nonstop that he was extraordinary, surrounded by people financially invested in his happiness rather than his well-being, and never given consistent access to real professional support. Without the tools to process any of it, he acted out, recklessly, publicly, in ways that hurt himself and others. And the people closest to him weren't equipped to intervene. Braun has spoken since about how impossible it felt trying to simultaneously manage and parent someone, and how hard it was to say no to a client he genuinely cared about. Patty was still there, still praying, still loving him. But she, too, was just a woman trying to hold herself together while watching her son unravel on a global stage. At 19, surrounded by people, Justin was profoundly alone. Then, in early 2014, after months of chaos, something shifted. He stopped. Not immediately, and not dramatically, but he began the slow work of actually examining his life. He started praying again, and this time it wasn't performative teenage habit. It was the kind of desperate, searching prayer people turn to when they're out of other options. He reconnected with Hillsong Church, and its pastor became a genuine friend, someone whose relationship with Justin wasn't tied to a paycheck. That pastor would later leave the church in 2020 following serious personal failings of his own, which shook Justin and made him question who he could actually trust. But back in 2014 and 2015, that friendship seemed to genuinely stabilize him. He also started therapy, slowly learning to name and process feelings he'd never had the space to deal with, and admitted in interviews just how difficult that stretch of his life had been. What came out of that period was the album Purpose, released in late 2015, widely regarded as his best work and remarkably candid. Track by track, it traced a young man reckoning with his past, trying to understand where things went wrong, and trying to make amends. The lead single became a massive, billion-plus stream hit, but it wasn't just catchy. It read as a genuine apology, without excuses. Other tracks, co-written with collaborators like Ed Sheeran, showed real emotional depth, enough to win over even his harshest critics. The album debuted at #1 nearly everywhere, earned him Grammys, and fueled a stadium tour that grossed north of $250 million. He was 21 and, from the outside, sitting at the absolute top of pop music. But that level of success came at a cost. The tour that made all that money also quietly wrecked him, though the world wouldn't fully understand that for a couple more years. He was performing nightly in massive venues, emotionally pouring himself out in a way that would exhaust even a seasoned veteran, and doing exhausting meet and greets with fans who'd saved for months to see him. Each interaction demanding he be flawlessly warm and on. Eventually, he started canceling those meet and greets, and fans were furious, but he later explained they were draining him completely. Constantly performing perfection for total strangers left him with nothing in reserve. Then, in the summer of 2017, he pulled the plug entirely, canceling the final stretch of the tour. Officially, it was framed as unforeseen circumstances. In later interviews, the real story came out: total burnout. Not a loud collapse, a quiet one. The kind where you wake up one day and don't recognize the person staring back. He'd started to feel like the smiling, touring version of himself was just a costume, and he'd lost the thread of who was underneath it. Hailey Baldwin first crossed paths with Justin when they were both teenagers, moving in the same small circle of famous Christian families. Her father, Stephen Baldwin, was a well-known and somewhat polarizing figure. Her uncle, Alec Baldwin, one of the most recognizable actors in the country. Unlike Justin, Hailey grew up famous by association rather than by her own spotlight, which shaped her very differently. The two were friends for years before anything romantic developed, a friendship that survived Justin's chaotic on-again, off-again relationship with Selena. Hailey watched from the sidelines through his roughest stretches, stayed close without leveraging his fame, and, crucially, always treated him like a regular person rather than a celebrity. Everything shifted in the summer of 2018. Justin and Selena had ended things, seemingly for good this time. He was 24, adrift, still working through years of therapy and faith-based healing, still trying to figure out who he was beyond the Justin Bieber persona. He and Hailey reconnected within weeks, fast enough to catch even close friends off guard, and got engaged almost immediately, sending shockwaves through entertainment media. Selena's famously devoted fanbase reacted badly, and some took it way too far. Hailey, whose only offense was falling for a single man, absorbed years of coordinated online harassment. She's spoken candidly about the abuse since: threats, mockery aimed at her appearance and intelligence, endless messages insisting she didn't deserve him. She married him anyway, first in a small civil ceremony in September 2018, then a larger church wedding in South Carolina a year later. He was 24 when he got married. To plenty of people his age, that felt impossibly fast. To those who actually knew him, it looked like one of the smartest moves he'd ever made. Since then, Hailey has become a genuinely steadying force, direct when he's spiraling, grounding when he's lost, and, notably, one of the few people in his life actually willing to be honest with him instead of just agreeing. Their marriage hasn't been friction-free. Both have talked openly about how hard it is to build a life together while each is still healing individually. But by every account from people close to them, the connection is real. Marriage didn't magically fix everything. Nothing ever does. But for the first time since leaving Stratford, it gave him something that actually felt like home. Then, in January 2020, he dropped news that reframed a lot of his past struggles. In an Instagram post and a Vogue interview, he revealed a Lyme disease diagnosis, a tick-borne illness that, left untreated, can cause serious cognitive and physical symptoms that mimic depression, chronic fatigue, and brain fog in ways doctors often struggle to pin down. He explained he'd quietly been dealing with it for years, and that the exhaustion, mood instability, trouble focusing, and physical pain he'd experienced had largely been misattributed, sometimes by fans, sometimes by himself, to bad habits or personal recklessness. Both things could be true simultaneously, and probably were, but there was also a genuine medical condition compounding everything while he tried to keep a global career running. For fans, the revelation reframed his rocky 2013 to 2015 stretch with more compassion. For skeptics, the timing, right before a new album, invited cynicism, itself a sign of how badly trust had eroded. Justin addressed that head-on, acknowledging his behavior during those years wasn't purely a health issue. Some of it really was on him, while making clear the illness was a real complicating factor, not an excuse. Then, in June 2022, things got harder again. He posted a video unlike anything he'd shared before, which, given how much of his life he's broadcast over the years, is saying something. In it, half of his face was completely frozen, no movement, an eye that wouldn't close, a smile that only worked on one side. He explained the diagnosis: Ramsay Hunt syndrome, a rare condition where a common virus attacks facial nerves. He showed the paralysis directly to camera, touched his face, tried and failed to move it, wearing an expression that mixed real fear with a strange, hard-won calm. The calm of someone who'd already survived enough crises to know how to sit with a new one. He asked fans for patience and prayers, canceled upcoming shows, and let the moment be raw instead of managed. That honesty resonated. He wasn't performing superstar in that clip. He was a 28-year-old telling the world his face didn't work and he had no idea when, or if, that would change. Recovery from Ramsay Hunt varies wildly person to person. His took time, medical care, rest, and exactly the kind of enforced stillness his entire career had been engineered to avoid. For a while, he simply couldn't do the one thing he'd built his whole identity around since he was 13, perform. And in that silence, he had to figure out who he was without a stage. To really understand his story, you have to look honestly at the industry that discovered him, one with a long, well-documented pattern of extracting everything it can from talented kids while they're marketable, then leaving them to reassemble a normal life on their own dime in their own time. Think of the string of young stars before him who struggled publicly, some fatally, under similar pressure. What connects all of those stories isn't just raw talent. It's how exposed and unprotected that talent was. Justin's situation had some real differences. An involved mother who fought for him, a manager who, by most accounts, genuinely cared about his well-being rather than just his output. He wasn't exploited by an outright predatory guardian or a ruthless label the way some earlier stars were. But there's more than one way to be harmed, and some of them look perfectly friendly on the surface. From 14 onward, the business demanded he be endlessly available, endlessly charming, endlessly photogenic, the wholesome boy next door and the edgy but safe pop product simultaneously. He had to manage a public persona across an increasingly relentless social media landscape, constantly performing gratitude and normalcy while his actual life was isolating and deeply abnormal. Nobody sat him down and explained the real cost of that arrangement, and honestly, nobody could have. He couldn't understand the price until he was already paying it. By the time his struggles became visible to the public, he was 19, wealthy, and famous, and the same industry responsible for his struggles was now profiting off headlines about them. The strange, one-directional bond between Justin and his fan base deserves attention too, because it might be the most confusing thread in his emotional journey. His fans, famously devoted, have expressed that devotion in ways ranging from genuinely moving to, frankly, alarming. Handwritten letters, waiting outside hotels for days in freezing weather, fundraising in his name. But some have also sent his wife horrific messages, harassed his friends, doxed his critics, and gone after anyone perceived as against him. He's expressed real gratitude for his fan base while also being honest about how overwhelming that attention can be and how impossible it is to have a genuine interaction with someone who's connecting with an image rather than the actual person. That gap is often unbridgeable. He's been criticized for even voicing that discomfort, since the public tends to expect celebrities to be endlessly grateful and never complain, an especially unfair standard for people who became famous as literal children. Nobody signs up to become a global brand at 13. Nobody that age has the life experience to understand what they're agreeing to. Justin walked through a door opened by his own talent and circumstance, and by the time he understood what was on the other side, turning back wasn't an option. His faith has been one of the most visible and most misread parts of his story. It started with his mother, whose own faith was forged out of having almost nothing else to hold on to. As a teenager, his faith looked fairly conventional. Church attendance, public statements, the kind of belief that fit neatly into the entertainment machine. That changed after 2014. The version of faith he found with the help of church leaders demanded much more of him. Real self-examination, real accountability for his choices and mistakes, not just surface-level belief. He said in interviews that sitting in church was the first time the language of redemption and second chances stopped feeling abstract and started feeling like it was actually about him. He's also been unusually candid about the flaws he's witnessed in organized religion. The fallout with his pastor was a genuine blow, and he's written about that disappointment while making clear his faith is rooted in something bigger than any single church or leader, a distinction his critics rarely give him credit for understanding. His 2021 album, Justice, continued the same thread of personal storytelling as Purpose, themes of regret, forgiveness, fairness, and accountability. It didn't match Purpose's commercial numbers, partly due to pandemic-related touring restrictions and partly because his position in pop music had simply shifted. He wasn't a teen idol anymore. He was a 27-year-old man singing about adult life, and the industry wasn't entirely sure what to do with that version of him. The singles still performed well, but public attention had noticeably drifted from his music toward his personal story. People were more invested in what he'd been through than in the songs themselves. A particularly personal single that year, largely about losing his grandmother, but also about everything and everyone he'd had to leave behind over the years, became one of his most beloved releases, earning praise from longtime critics and loyal fans alike for its unguarded honesty. One of the most emotionally loaded threads in his story is his relationship with his father. Over 3 decades, it's evolved from near total absence to a complicated, ongoing presence. As Justin's fame grew, Jeremy started showing up more at concerts, in photos, in interviews, even getting matching tattoos with his son. People noticed the timing, and so did Justin. In interviews, he's addressed his father carefully and thoughtfully, not pretending everything's fine, but also not writing him off. He's acknowledged the real pain of his father's absence and the burden that placed on his mother, while also expressing genuine care for his father and a desire to understand rather than simply judge him, recognizing that Jeremy had his own rough upbringing and wasn't ready for fatherhood at the time. In one particularly memorable interview, Justin explained that he chose to forgive his father not because Jeremy had earned it, but because Justin needed to release that resentment for his own sake. A genuinely mature realization that reflects real personal growth. That whole arc, absence, then a messy return, then gradual reconciliation, has clearly shaped who he is, and he's talked about wanting to be a present, engaged father himself. In May 2024, he and Haley announced they were expecting their first child, news that felt, to a lot of fans, like a long-awaited exhale. Looking at all the turbulence, it's worth remembering what he actually built. He fundamentally changed how the music industry uses the internet. Being discovered on YouTube wasn't just his personal origin story. It became the model every label scrambled to replicate for the next decade. Talent surfacing organically through views and engagement. Artists connecting directly with audiences without needing gatekeepers first. A kid with a webcam reaching the entire world with zero marketing budget. All of that feels obvious now, but it wasn't before him. He was the first real proof that the internet could hand ordinary people a platform. He also reshaped the sound of mainstream pop, blending R&B production with pop songwriting in a way that became the template for a whole generation of artists who followed, and his eagerness to collaborate across hip-hop, dance, and country helped normalize the genre blending that defines pop music today. He also shifted the public conversation around celebrity mental health. His willingness to talk openly about setbacks, illness, and the toll of fame helped chip away at the old expectation that stars keep their struggles private. He wasn't the first to do that, but he was one of the most visible, and his honesty reached people who genuinely needed to hear it. And his very public unraveling in 2013 and 2014 forced a broader cultural reckoning about what we owe the young stars we manufacture, what it means to build someone up purely to enjoy watching them fall, and how a media ecosystem profits either way. To tell his story honestly, you also have to spend real time on his mother. She's his first fan, his fiercest advocate, and the person whose sacrifices made everything else possible. Her own history is just as remarkable and difficult as his. She's spoken openly about serious childhood trauma, a genuinely dark adolescence, and a crisis at 17 severe enough to require serious medical intervention. She found faith the way people often do when they've run out of alternatives, because they need something solid to hold on to. When Justin was born a year later, she was 18 and essentially on her own, and against advice from people around her, she chose to raise him herself, working multiple jobs, moving constantly, praying constantly, building a childhood for her son out of almost nothing. People who knew them back home describe a household short on money, but full of genuine warmth. When the industry came calling, she did something a lot of parents in her position don't. She went with him, sacrificing her own life, friendships, and identity to protect his, stepping into a world that often treated her as an obstacle rather than an asset. She fought, not always successfully, to preserve some boundary between Justin the person and Justin Bieber the brand, pushing back against managers and executives to make sure he got a real education and that his faith stayed authentic rather than becoming a PR talking point. She didn't win every fight. The forces working against her had far more money and far less interest in his well-being than in profit. But she tried, consistently, and that effort mattered enormously in how he eventually found his footing. Her 2012 memoir revealed just how hard-earned her own survival story was, and reading it makes clear exactly where Justin's resilience originally came from. He learned it by watching her first. Between canceling his 2017 tour and slowly re-emerging with his 2020 album Changes, Justin took an extended, forced pause. He's called that period both frightening and necessary. He'd been a public figure since he was 13, constantly reacting to whatever crisis or demand was in front of him. That break, accelerated later by the 2022 health scare, forced him into genuine solitude for maybe the first time in his life, and what he found there wasn't easy to sit with. In candid interviews, he's talked about confronting habits he didn't know how to fix, unpredictable bursts of frustration, and stretches of unexplained sadness that could last days. He's also discussed how difficult real intimacy became after years of treating relationships transactionally, giving people whatever kept things smooth rather than being genuinely present. He put in real work, therapy, church, intense physical training as an outlet for stress, and painting, a hobby he picked up during this stretch that gave him a way to just exist as a person rather than a product. Slowly, he repaired relationships that had frayed. His bond with his father became more balanced and honest, and his relationship with his mother evolved into something more mutual as she found her own identity outside of motherhood. For most of his life, Justin had been the center of everyone's attention. In the quiet, he learned to take a different place among the people who loved him. What got him through, by his own account, was his mother's faith, his wife's steadiness, his own persistence, and what he calls grace. In 2020, amid a broader cultural reckoning around misconduct, Justin faced serious allegations from two anonymous accusers on social media, one describing an incident from 2014, the other from 2015, arriving at a moment when the public was finally taking these kinds of claims seriously. His response stood out for how thorough it was. Rather than issuing a vague denial through lawyers, he posted a detailed, point-by-point rebuttal with specific dates, locations, and supporting material, hotel records, social posts, and other documentation from the nights in question. Both accusers eventually deleted their posts. No law enforcement involvement followed, and no further allegations emerged. He later pursued a defamation lawsuit seeking damages, which he ultimately dropped in 2022. The episode illustrates something important about how the public perceives him. His own well-documented past mistakes made him an easier target for accusations than someone with a cleaner record, since it's genuinely harder to separate old, real misbehavior from new, unverified claims. He's acknowledged that dynamic directly, essentially saying he understands why people are quick to assume the worst, that he's the reason for that assumption, and that all he can do now is control his own actions and let a better track record speak for itself. It's not a clean resolution. Real life rarely offers one, but it's an honest snapshot of where he stands relative to his past. In May 2024, Haley shared a photo that lit up her entire audience. A white dress catching the light, her hands resting on a visible baby bump, Justin standing beside her, a caption stripped down to almost nothing. The reaction was overwhelmingly warm, the rare celebrity milestone that cuts through the noise and just feels human. The boy who grew up at breakneck speed under a global spotlight was about to become a father himself, and for fans who know his history, the significance of that isn't subtle. He spent much of his adult life reckoning with growing up without a consistently present father and working to heal from that, and he's talked repeatedly about wanting to be genuinely, day-to-day present for his own kids, not just a big occasion parent. Their son was born in August 2024, and Justin posted photos of a tiny hand wrapped around his finger, writing about the moment with total openness. One of those posts where the pop star persona drops away and you're just looking at a person. He's 30 now, famous for more than half his life, and he's survived stretches that would have derailed a lot of people. He's made mistakes he can't undo and music that's genuinely mattered to millions. What his career looks like from here is still an open question, whether he returns to music in a major way, whether the health issues stay behind him, whether an industry built for constant reinvention has room for the adult he's become. He said he wants to keep making music, and fatherhood has clearly given him new material and new motivation. Whether new songs land the way the old ones did is impossible to predict in a business that moves this fast and usually favors the newest name in the room. But his story was never really just about chart positions. It's a human story about what happens when enormous talent collides with enormous fame before a person is anywhere close to ready, and it's still being written. There's a clip that resurfaces constantly online. One of the very first videos his mother posted back in 2007. In it, he's 13, sitting behind a drum kit in what looks like a school gymnasium, playing with total, unself-conscious focus. He's not performing for the camera. He doesn't even realize he's being watched. He's just playing purely for the joy of it. Knowing everything that comes after, it's almost uncomfortable to watch now. You want to reach through the screen and warn everyone involved. Warn his mom. Warn the internet about to discover him. Warn the manager about to click a link that changes everything. You want to tell them to be careful, that this is a kid, not a product, that the world is about to ask more of him than any 13-year-old should have to give, and that he needs more protection than anyone around him realizes. But that warning can't be sent. What's done is done. The tape is the tape. And the boy in that video grew into a genuinely massive story. But what's remarkable, looking at the full arc, is that he's still here, still functioning, still making music, still married, still connected to his parents, still guarding his mental health, still showing up to church, still moving forward. Given everything that hit him from the moment he landed in Atlanta, an industry that chews up young stars, and a very public unraveling most people would never recover from, the fact that he's healed as much as he has and built a genuinely happy life is a big deal. It's genuinely rare. His mother is in her 40s now. She's written a book, deep in her own faith, discovered who she is separate from being Justin's mom, and watched her son become a husband and father, doing the work of finding himself that she couldn't do for him. Haley is 29, has built a successful career and a beauty brand alongside modeling, and has been candid about how hard it's been to love him publicly, dealing with online hostility and the long shadow of his past, while continuing to choose him, focused on the actual person rather than the headline version. His father is still around. Their relationship still has its rough patches, but there's real affection there now. And Justin, the kid from a small Canadian town who sang for his mom's camera and accidentally became one of the biggest pop stars alive, is now the one holding his own son's hand in a photo. There's something in his expression there that was noticeably absent during the roughest years of his fame, a sense of actually being present. After everything, he's still here. And the man he's become, still imperfect, still working on himself, still trying, is a far more interesting story than the polished pop star image